Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive. Brendan Slaughter here with you, filling in for Chad Doing. Hope everyone's having a good afternoon so far. Just got done talking with Sean Hyken from the Rose Garden Report. Some good stuff there from Sean as we were able to, talk about the Blazers lottery, talk about the impending sale. I had to ask him the question, should Blazer fans even have an inkling of worry about whether or not the team's going to be sold? And taking it from Sean, it really doesn't sound like at this point that's anything to get too worried about, which, I born and raised here as well and want to see the Trailblazers stay put as well. So naturally something I'm curious about. But at this stage, and like Sean said, that's the thing that really rings home with me. The Seattle Supersonics situation was such, like Sean said, a black eye for the league, a PR disaster. Again, to quote Sean, when you're talking about just the way that it went about, right? The way that they got moved, the way that Seattle lost their team and had to pretty much suffer up until now, like we heard from Sean. Seattle and Vegas will be the two expansion teams whenever that is. So that's awesome. Got to bring back the I-5 rivalry, but it's understandable, right? It's understandable. That was my first thought too. Is this something the Blazers have, Blazer fans have to worry about? And I think it's going to come down to the vetting process, the ownership process. And like Sean said, it's not easy to do. And Adam Silver had a front row seat for watching that whole thing go down. And then I think they kind of, I'm not going to say made up for it, but they learned from their mistakes, like Sean said, keeping the Kings in Sacramento for that reason, because they didn't want to have that happen again, even if it was the Kings hypothetically being moved to Seattle, which had lost the team. Then you would have had the whole problem over again with the Kings. So, I think Sean's kind of spot on at this moment, and as time goes, we'll see. But going back to what we were talking about, right? This is going to be a sale. My pure layman's understanding of sports values and money, I'm going to say this will go anywhere. Probably on the low side, 3.5 billion. High side, probably 5 billion. Sports teams, as we've talked about, they're rare commodities that billionaires will compete for. It's its own exclusive club. And a lot of people out there, heck, myself, which one of y'all listen to me in your car radios or at the gym or wherever you are right now? If someone said, do you want to own a sports team? I think that's the dream of a lot of people. I want to, put these people in place and all these things. So for those people who have money, it's an exclusive club. And I think that's why it won't be difficult to find a buyer. I think it's just going to be interesting to see how that process, ultimately goes. And as I mentioned, Adam Silver had a front row seat for what happened with the Sonics, and I don't think it's going to, be an issue here. Now, again, personally speaking, there aren't so many billionaires. There are only so many billionaires in the world, right? And even more specifically, billionaires in the United States. So that narrows down the pool quite a bit. And, obviously you see all the richest people in the world thrown out there. Maybe a little bit later in the show, we might go down the Forbes all-time billionaires list and maybe throw out some fun names, some kooky names, and, maybe a few that are way out there. But I'm curious, throughout the course of the show, we might come back to this list and look at the real-time billionaires list. And again, you have someone who you think should buy the Blazers? 503-248-0620. Give me your case as to why. Right now, I mean, we all know where the money is these days. It's in tech. Tech money is what rules the world right now. I'm not saying somebody who doesn't have tech money couldn't come in and buy it. They sure could, oil, any of these number of things, lots of profitable industries. But when you're looking at what rules the roost now, it's tech. So I'm very curious to kind of see how this vetting process goes. A little bit later in the show, we'll dive back into, we'll throw out some fun names just for fun. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Friday. What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here. The Denver Nuggets force a deciding Game 7 with the Oklahoma City Thunder with a 119-107 win in Denver in Game 6. That series will now shift back to OKC for the final Game 7 of the series. The Boston Celtics are facing elimination tonight at the Garden as the Knicks will look to close out the series in 6, while the Celtics will look to win 2 in a row and force a Game 7. Again, no Jason Tatum for the Celtics. Brock Purdy and San Francisco have agreed on a 5-year, $265 million pact. He will be paid more in 1 week of the new contract than his entire previous contract. A heck of a story for the last pick in the 2022 NFL Draft. Last hour, we caught up with Sean Highkin from the Rose Garden Report. Good stuff there from Sean. This hour, we'll be catching up with TJ Mathewson from the Marine Layer podcast. And in the 5 o'clock hour, we'll be catching up with Dylan Callahan-Crowley from Rivals and Beaver's Edge. You've got the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back into Rip City Drive here on a Friday. Hope everyone's having a good Friday so far. Surviving the cloudy day that is. Nothing fancy outside, but I'm like, we'll be getting closer to summer as time goes along. Brendan Slaughter filling in for Chad Doing here today. Great conversation last hour with Sean Highkin. Again, talked about the Blazers and the lottery. Talked about the possibility of a new owner maybe looking to shake some things up. Could they look to relocate the team? And Sean was like, no, that's probably not too likely. I'm kind of in the same boat, but again, question has to be asked with the new owner most absolutely coming in and all these things. Got his thoughts on the Phil Knight decision as well. So lots of great stuff from Sean Highkin. Again, make sure to check out his stuff over at the Rose Garden Report. And again, we were also talking last hour, just I'm curious, right? There are only so many people in the United States that have, let's just assume that you're not going to use your entire net worth to buy the team. So let's just say double. There's only so many people in the United States that are worth $10 billion dollars or more, right? Let's just assume, like, say they sold for 5, right? Let's just assume 5. And you're going to want somebody to still have some worth afterwards, right? Some cash to be able to spend. So, at that point, you're looking at somebody who's worth at least $10 billion dollars. And, that's still a pretty finite list. And one thing, we'll be getting into if we have time, maybe a little bit throughout the show and maybe even into next week, is, there's one of the coolest things I like to do is Forbes has their real-time billionaires list on Forbes.com. And, you can scroll and see, starts all the way at the top, Mr. Elon, Mr. Zuckerberg, those guys, and, goes all the way down to, people who are worth, 13 billion, 12 billion. So I'm very curious to see ultimately, just in the next, like we've talked about, this is nothing that's going to resolve itself quickly. But in the next, maybe year, what names maybe start to emerge, right? Like we heard when the Washington Commanders were for sale a couple years ago, or, and, you heard for a while, it was like Josh Harris's group, right? There was the thought of Magic Johnson being in the mix for a minute. Like, so you just kind of start to hear, and you hear just kind of little pockets of information start to come up. And as we mentioned, last hour, owning an NBA franchise, owning any kind of sports team, professional, whether that be, NBA, NHL, any of the big professional franchises, it is just an exclusive club. Like you think, oh yeah, no, you're a billionaire. You're in the billionaire club, right? Well, there's still a couple hundred, if not more, billionaires in this world. Still only 30 NBA owners, right? 32 NFL owners, so on and so forth. So I'm very curious to see what names ultimately start to rise up a little bit. And I'm also kind of in Sean's, neighborhood as far as like, you kind of want to get somebody who's got a runway, and you go look at a lot of these people on the Forbes billionaire list. A lot of them, the majority of them, are in their 70s, late 60s, early 80s, and that's to be expected for billionaires. It takes a long time usually to accumulate a lot of assets. But that all being said, I'm just very curious to kind of see what names maybe start to rise up, who may be interested, who may not. And I think there's endless possibilities. So it's something I'm very intrigued and exciting, and I think there's going to be a lot to definitely dive into as we get more there. But maybe yeah, later in the show we might take a closer look at some of those lists. And again, 503-248-0620. If you're like, hey, Brendan, so and so who's worth 40 billion needs to buy the Blazers. Well, tell me why, right? I mean, I think it's there's lots of intriguing possibilities and lots of intriguing options, and we'll kind of just see where the chips fall as far as that goes. But switching gears, talking a little NBA before we catch up with TJ Mathewson. We'll talk Mariners with him coming up at 4:20 and get his take on the Mariners. They've obviously leading the AL West, but dealing with a few injuries on the pitching staff. Talk a little bit of that with him. I also really want to talk Andor with TJ as well. For those of you who don't know, Andor is a Star Wars TV show that TJ and I and many others have been super into. And Andor just dropped their season finale of their 12-episode season this week, and oh man, it was awesome. So we'll tightrope and talk about a few things. I don't want to, give away some major spoilers, but it has been out for, 3-4 days now. So I think we're kind of in the clear, but we'll talk a little Andor as well with TJ Mathewson at 4:20. But let's go ahead and just get back to the NBA here for a few minutes, folks, because so much has happened this week. I mean, I mentioned it earlier in the broadcast, but I was in Las Vegas this week, spent a couple days down there and got back yesterday, just, getting down, just getting, to the pool, some nice weather, just relaxing for a couple days, nothing crazy. But I was there in Vegas amongst quite a few people watching the Celtics game at a sports bar, sports bar in the casino, whatever you want to call it, when Jason Tatum got hurt. And I can honestly say that's one of the more like collective that I've kind of ever heard in like a loud kind of situation. And, I'm obviously not a diehard Celtics fan, but y'all remember from when I hosted Blazers Game Day going back a couple months. I think Peyton Pritchard's a really cool story and giving me kind of something to pull for there. I also, think Jason Tatum is a really good player and very easy to root for, right? Very likable guy. And just seeing that injury and seeing the absoluteness of it was just, it was tough. And then, it just brings back like how much injuries suck in sports, and it's part of the game. It is. And that's how teams adjust and rise up and, next man up and all those things. But respectfully, you can't have a next man up when you're replacing Jason Tatum. You can't have a next man up when you're replacing Steph Curry. It's kind of like respectfully, what has it been now? Quite a few number of years ago, the Blazers, when, before Wes Matthews popped his Achilles, kind of the same thing. We all know that Blazers team that year had a chance to do some really good things and were playing really good basketball and maybe could have made a real run at the thing. Don't know how real a run of a thing it was, but nevertheless. And, you take out a key piece of your team. Now, I think Boston's built really well, and if there's a team that could win still two more in the series and get it done, it would be Joe Mazzulla and that three-point barrage of a team that they have. And, dare I say, is there a little magic still left in the Leprechaun, man? Maybe I'm a little biased because I just watched that Celtic City documentary on HBO. Would highly encourage anybody who hasn't watched, I believe it's 8 or 9 parts, to check that out on HBO. It's awesome. And I must say after that, there's been some degrees of luck with the Celtics too. It's like sometimes their highs are as big as their lows. Right. And you talk about some tragedies they've had in their history. Obviously, the most winning franchise. I know that, too. But it's kind of like they've won a lot and also kind of sometimes have some real, just hard things that have happened to them as a franchise. And, that kind of was something that came up to the forefront watching that documentary. But I really, again, the Knicks are in the driver's seat. They're at, Madison Square Garden tonight. They got a chance to, take them out. And, in this particular case, in the NBA, you have to kill the king to be able to be the new king, right? And even without Jason Tatum, until the Knicks can get by the Celtics are still the king, man. And that goes even if the Celtics made the NBA Finals as well. So, I think the Knicks do have the advantage, but it would not shock me to see Boston win tonight just because how deep Boston is, the way that they can shoot the three-pointer, and again, we saw it the first couple games. If the three-pointer's not falling, Boston, they're probably on the outs. They're probably on the outs. I'll just be honest. If they have a night where they're on fire from three and you got Peyton Pritchard coming off the bench bringing in threes. You got Sam Hauser coming off the bench dropping threes. I really think that this could force to a game seven, and you push this to a game seven at TD Garden. Okay, Boston Garden, whatever you want to call it. That I know it's not the same building, but that particular Boston in game sevens, man, that's tough. So I think the Knicks have to close it out tonight. If they don't, I think Boston will get this series in seven. And can Boston? How far could Boston go without Jason Tatum? I think it's going to be how far Jaylen Brown can carry them, how far their role players can keep them, the 3-point shooting that we talked about, KP, Kristaps Porzingis, but. Nevertheless, I'm absolutely fascinated to see how that series ultimately ends up shaking out both tonight and then if there ends up being a game seven. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. And then, just to finish up before we catch up with TJ and switch gears to baseball here in a few minutes, the Nuggets force a game seven against the Thunder with a 119-107 win in Denver last night. Again, the Nuggets were led by balanced scoring, 29 from Jokic, 25 from Murray, 23 from Christian Brown. And this series has been, ever since the Nuggets won that first game, just fascinating to me because Thunder came in with 68 wins in the regular season. That's 18 more than Denver. And I know it means nothing in the regular season. We saw that with what the Pacers did to the Cavs. But there was some chatter that, this might have been, the best probably regular season as far as the plus minus all those metrics the Thunder had been so great at probably since the 73 win Warriors. I'm speaking a little out of pocket there, but same kind of generally conversation was, hey, this Thunder team is legit. They lost 14 times all year. They were 2 wins away from 70, which we know 70 piece is nothing easy to do in the NBA, especially nowadays with load management and everything else that comes to be as well. So I thought that's win for Denver was awesome. Going to game seven in Oklahoma City, I'm going to like the Thunder in that game. But here's the deal. As much as I love Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and I think he is probably the MVP this year, I think, pound for pound, Nikola Jokic is the best player on the planet. And when you have the best player on the planet on your team, you have the possibility and the chance of winning this. So if you're telling me right now, going back to OKC, the Thunder should feel great, like they're in the driver's seat. Sure, OKC has got a great home court advantage and all those things. But when you've got the Joker, I really, really think that, this is going to be a dandy of a game. And, again, it's one of those things where we've seen some great battles this postseason, and I think we continue to see it. So I want to go ahead and hear from David Adelman, Nuggets head coach, real quick before we take a break on that game set or moving the series back to game seven.
Yeah, I mean those losses were tough, but I mean it was 3-2. The series is still here. I've said this. I know it's cliche, but every game is its own chapter. It's its own thing. It's its own entity. And different people are going to step up, just like for them. They've had people step up in game 4 and 5. And tonight we had that team that did it. And now you put yourself in a situation where, hey, let's go see what happens on Sunday.
Couldn't have said it any better myself, and very much like Chad doing, pulling for David Adelman to an extent, too. With the Rick Adelman connection, that's a really cool deal, too. We'll dive a little bit more into the NBA playoffs a little bit later in the show, but when we come back, TJ Mathewson from the Marine Layer podcast here on Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive. Brendan Slaughter filling in for Chad doing today and for all of next week, too. So definitely make sure to stay tuned as we got lots to talk about, lots to get into. But very excited for this next segment where I get to bring on my good friend, TJ Mathewson from the Marine Layer podcast. TJ, what's going on, my man? Good to talk to you.
It's good to hear your voice, and now I'm going to expose you. Are you going to get a haircut soon?
So, a little behind the scenes for those who are not watching on the YouTube chat. So, my good buddy TJ Mathewson, who I love dearly and would consider one of my very good friends, sends me a text right before we go on air, and he goes, "Bro, you need a haircut." And my response was, "The flow is perfect." To which TJ said, "We are past the flow stage." TJ, when you've been growing your hair out for as long as I have, almost 2 years now, you can't just cut it on a whim. It's like a part of me now, brother.
I feel like you can, though, because at some point you need to get to you need to make a decision on it. Eventually, you're going to cut your hair. I'm suggesting that epiphany comes sooner.
It's interesting because I've actually to your point, TJ, I've actually kind of enjoyed being able to have long hair. Like I've had the man bun, I've had the ponytail, and you're not going to lie, man, it was a pretty good look when I was in Vegas this week.
It's a lot longer than I remembered. It's grown a lot.
No, again, for those who haven't known, TJ and I used to be, real close working, near daily when he was down in Corvallis working for KJO Radio and BeaversEdge.com, of course. And now TJ is full time with the Marine Layer up in Seattle. So, yeah, TJ, I mean, it's been probably 6 months or so since we've seen each other, man. Just before we get into the nitty gritty, man, just how you been? I miss you, dog.
It's been busy up here. I love baseball season, though, Brendan. There's nothing better than for me just a summer, or I guess right now a spring of Mariners baseball, and just staying busy. And there's been a lot of really fun opportunities up here. I'm very happy to be back up here. I'm feeling very fulfilled.
Yeah, no, I mean, and obviously with how good of a start the Mariners have been off to this season, that obviously makes it a lot more fun, and obviously a lot to dive into there. They currently lead the AL West. What's kind of been your keys, or what have you seen has kind of been key to this hot start, and is it sustainable, you think?
If you take out this week, I think this group's been super resilient. They've had some injuries, especially in the rotation. If you were to tell a Mariners fan in March that they would have their I'll say 3 top arms all on the injured list at the same time,
right,
you'd show them what the bottom of the lineup currently looks like, and you'd say, yeah, they're in first place, and be like, no, they're not. But they currently are, because they've managed to find production from a lot of different areas of the team. I think a lot of it that they didn't expect. But they are going to need to get some guys healthy, because I don't think their current product sustains itself without some better health. Now, if they get healthy and they get all their best players back, and some of the guys that are performing really well continue to perform really well, first place is not out of the question, because the American League West stinks this season. I don't really think there's another good or arguably great team in the division. It's going to be a mid-80s win team that could win the division this year. If the Mariners just get completely healthy and have a good bill of health from here on out and nothing else goes astray, I mean, they could win 87 games, and that'll be plenty to win the division this year. But they got to get to that point, and they need to perform well, and they can't do what they did last year, which is start stinking all at once, and guys just, aren't really locked in, and it's just a bad mix, manager gets fired, et cetera. So you try and avoid that.
Right, and I was curious just kind of your comparisons to last year, TJ, because, last year you could have made the argument the Mariners, had the starting rotation to take them pretty far, into the postseason. And, you mentioned the inconsistencies, and I think, at least, once a week or whatever, hosting, it's like, Mariners questions come up, and it's like, how seriously can you take them at this point in the season? And I will objectively ask you, at this point, do you kind of see this as kind of the team that you think they can be this year, or is it kind of still too early to kind of see all the pieces coming together?
I still think it's too early, but I do like what I've seen so far, and it offers a promising look. I will remind people, though, they were 10 games up in the division in June last year, and they looked – I wouldn't say they looked – the record was good, but I think their 10-game lead last year was mostly due to the fact that the rest of the division was severely underperforming, in which case then the division rebounded, especially the Astros in the second half, and they stormed back and they took the division for the Mariners. That I just don't think is the case this year, because all the teams in the West are significantly worse than they were last year. Sans the Mariners. I don't think the Mariners are that much worse, because they essentially are running back the exact same team. They just had the unfortunate reality of having to deal with injury, something they really didn't have to do last year. Over this stretch, Brendan, they haven't had everything click at once sans the 2022 season, where outside of a slow start to the season into June, they then rip off an incredible stretch down the run of the season. They hit well. They had an elite bullpen. They got really good starting pitching that year, and everything worked out, and they made the playoffs, and it was great. But then if you go to 2023, the offense was severely inconsistent. They had a lot of growing pains in the rotation. Last year, you had a lot of mixed messaging from coaches and what their hitting philosophy was, which led to tragic underperformance across the board offensively, which was the biggest reason of them missing the playoffs. On top of that, what their bullpen, which they could normally rely upon, they didn't get much production from and blew a ton of leads down the stretch of last season. Down the stretch of this season, can they avoid some of those catastrophic failures that have led them to miss the playoffs by a game, a handful of times in the last handful of years? They're the only team that manages to do this. They got to find a way to avoid that.
It sounds, TJ, like you've got some internal frustration too, where it's like, come on, we've got to just get this thing in gear. You know what I mean?
They have missed the playoffs by a handful of games just in the last decade. In 2014, they missed by one game. 2016, they were down by a game to the last weekend of the season. They ended up missing by 3, but they still had their chance to make it. In 2018, they had a 10-game lead on a playoff spot, missed. 2021, missed the playoffs by a game. 22, they made it. 23, they missed by a game. 24, they missed by a game. I mean, like this is what we're talking about, Brendan.
Yeah.
It just keeps happening.
TJ,
they have to find a way to figure it out. The team is talented enough to do it. They need to figure it out.
Oh yeah, no, I feel like this is conversations we've had forever, and like you and I have talked about. Sometimes there's some. You worked at a place, TJ, where I think a lot of, for a long time, where maybe some Oregon State fans and Mariner fans kind of have some overlapping frustrations from time to time. So you definitely know. Again, catching up with TJ Mathewson from the Marine Layer podcast up in Seattle. He's got merchandise available up at the marinelayerpod.com, and he's also got a live show coming up at noon next Saturday at Queen Anne Beer Hall. TJ, how excited are you for that?
The live shows have been so much fun, Brendan. You would love those. It's great. I mean, it's very interactive, fan focused. People listen to us talk, but we do some trivia as well. We got a ton of giveaways. I'm sitting next to all the giveaways right now, and people are going to win some really fun things if they come. If you're listening to this in the Seattle area, noon next Saturday, would love to have you.
Okay, like TJ said there, folks, Queen Anne Beer Hall. I mean, again, TJ, if you weren't 3.5 hours away from me, dog, I'd be there supporting you, man. This is true. But, no, just a couple more things Mariner-wise before we got to shift gears and talk a little Andor. And before I brought you on, TJ, I started to kind of let people know, I'm like, we're going to talk some Andor. It's been out for a couple days. I'm like, maybe if you haven't seen it and you're, wanting to avoid the spoilers, got to turn down the mics just a little bit because TJ and I are going to talk about a few things. But just to wrap up on the Mariners, you mentioned the injuries to the pitching staff. Anything long-term, or is everyone going to kind of get back?
The lucky thing for them is there's no structural damage with any of them, which is great. George Kirby in spring training had a sore shoulder, but he feels good now. He's throwing 98 down in Tacoma as he's rehabbing. That's good. Logan Gilbert was the one I was most concerned about, but they did MRIs on his elbow, no structural damage. Said, all right, we'll rest it. He threw his first bullpen this week. He threw light. He got back up to about 94 miles an hour, which is pretty good for his first time back on a mound. And then Bryce Miller, again, he also had an MRI as he exited with also elbow inflammation. And they said, yeah, there's no damage here. And Bryce just rest up and get better. And I think Bryce, for a number of reasons, needed a couple of weeks off to sort of reset because he didn't look very good. But nothing indicates long-term right now from those guys. You can't predict the future. I still do have a feeling another shoe will drop and there will be another injury in this rotation, potentially more severe. Just based off of how the injuries went last year, you just kind of expect the pendulum to swing back the other way. But as of right now, they seem to be good. You just got to give it probably about a month and a half till those guys are all back and all firing on all cylinders.
Absolutely. Again, catching up with TJ Mathewson from the Marine Layer podcast for everything's Mariners, guys. You definitely want to check out TJ. He is as connected as anybody, and they do great work up there at the Marine Layer podcast. So if you got the Mariners bug, definitely look that up. All right, TJ, we got the business out of the way. Let's talk about the fun stuff. So you and I have been texting for, a couple months. Well, I shouldn't say a couple months, but maybe so, like before Andor, when it first dropped, and then kind of checking in after each round of 3 episodes. I have to start with this. I loved, TJ, that they released them in 3-episode intervals. So you had 12 whole episodes this season, but you got them all in 4 weeks. And I think it was like the perfect amount of like binge versus like get one episode and then be like, oh, is that all I get before next week? I think they handled that part of it perfectly.
And they listened to the biggest complaints from the first season, which unfortunately turned some people off. Again, having watched this entire show now, I can't believe how people were turned off from the show.
I agree.
Because it's too slow. I'm like, okay.
I mean, like I've learned, TJ, with TV, everyone's got something else.
The biggest, there are some other things too, which we could get to, but the biggest complaint from season 1 is that the second episodes of these arcs, these 3-episode, 4-episode arcs in season 1 were too slow, which I get, right? You got to build something, but I love the way they did it, and I think it sequenced out. Selfishly, I wish they just spent 4 seasons on this last season like they originally said they were going to, but if they weren't going to have the money to do it correctly, which it didn't sound like they were going to be able to, I'm glad they spent their money on one just phenomenal final season.
Yeah, it was the same kind of thing where compared to the first season where I kind of felt like it was pretty well drawn out. Like you said, I could see it where I would say not slow, TJ. I mean, as you can relate to me on this. A lot of people could say House of Dragons season 2 was slow. I'd say it was dialogue heavy. I don't like to say a show is slow as much as it's maybe just dialogue heavy. It's building a story, right? And for those who were maybe disappointed, like for instance, House of Dragons season 2, you won't be season 3 because it was all building towards season 3. And, you could kind of tell, like we all knew what the ending was. We knew that, we were going to eventually basically find, where we found Cassian in Rogue One. But the one thing is we jumped through so many years, right? It's like it was interesting. You'd watch an episode, then you'd see 1 year later or something like that. So you jumped ahead quite a bit. But I must say just the storytelling, like I was telling this, host here, Chad Doing, was watching the show too. We were talking about a week ago, and I was like, they never really like explored the Senate building in the movies, right? So you got to explore like that's just one example, but like their ability to kind of explore Coruscant in different ways was something we never really saw. I liked the storytelling from it, and for the most part, like this season was just awesome. It was awesome. There weren't really any episodes I was like, oh, didn't really see what they were going for there, and go ahead.
I got a real laugh of a video I saw where it was like, finally a show that doesn't go to Tatooine.
See, it's true, and I mean, obviously,
I got a kick out of that. But I 100% agree with you, Brennan. Like the sets were so good, and they go to some places that, like, I guess you could only really do if you have the budget that they had for the show and that they were willing to spend on the show. Like, I don't think they explore that much of Coruscant if they're gonna save some money on the show. But since they were gonna splurge on one final season of it, I mean, it just looked fantastic. The best thing about this show, as you said, since the story's already out, everyone knows what happened, right? The lore's already written. They're basing this off of something. You don't have to worry about screwing up the ending.
Right. So
the ending sort of just flows right into the movie, which I need to watch this weekend now to sort of cap that. And that's where Andor has the advantage over something like Game of Thrones, where Game of Thrones had to end the show somehow, and they ended it extremely poorly and on a tight budget. But Andor already had the ending written. The movie was out 10 years ago.
Right. And I think
so they don't have to stress over how they're going to finish it.
Right. And I think that's one of the more it's kind of one of the things that I think in previous times, TJ, prequels had kind of gotten a bad rap. And I'll just be honest, they had, right? And then now we've seen like some prequels that have like really worked. Like for those who had watched, Better Call Saul is just right there with Breaking Bad, in my opinion. I think, House of Dragon in some way, it just for the longest time, and even with Andor, like we knew what was going to happen. We knew that some characters would not be with us because, again, did we see Luthen in Rogue One?
Yeah.
So we knew
he wasn't in the movie.
Right. So we knew that
in the movie.
Yeah. So we knew that some things were going to, change and lead into. The one thing that I would have liked to see, TJ, and I kind of want to get your take on this because I'm sitting here, watching it and loving every bit of it. But the one thing I would have liked to have seen, and I did see where the director or creator of the show is like, we didn't want to go in this direction, and I totally respect that. But the fan in me, I wanted to see a Darth Vader or Palpatine appearance.
No, because the point of the show is how Star Wars is more than just people with lightsabers and Force abilities.
It's
we
true.
Saw one person at the end who had the Force, quote unquote.
It's
So
true.
that's really it. It was very minimal.
Right. And I guess when we brought back like, for me bringing back Krennic as Ben Mendelsohn and having him be in like that kind of satisfied a lot for me because I loved him in Rogue One, love him as an actor. And when I saw him for the first time, I'm like, ooh, okay, we're bringing back Ben Mendelsohn, talk about the Death Star and whatnot. I kind of like the storyline, with Dedra as well and, her kind of future that is, in limbo. Like I assume we just assume she's in prison for like the rest of the time.
She's in prison.
Right.
Yeah.
And then obviously, like I said, for anyone that hasn't seen the exact ending, I will say give you exactly 5 seconds to turn off, but where are we going with the baby?
So the baby, I don't think the baby matters. The story's over.
I mean, is there a possibility though that leaves open? I mean, think about it. The Star Wars universe is never ending. Like that's the thing. And I was just wondering, like, did they leave it open that they could they follow something with Cassian's kid in 20 years? Right? Like I was talking about that with my producer before we brought you on. It's like that would be like somewhere in like the First Order time, right? Like after Return of the Jedi. So you never know. And I think that's the thing with Star Wars that is so exciting is there's so many possibilities of things that they could continue to make. And I've said for a while, like, you could still do a Darth Vader story between episodes 3 and 4. I know you and I are, definitely into like, the Ahsoka series that we think might come back. I think just it's like a blank sheet of canvas.
Acolyte. I wanted more Acolyte.
I
feel like I was in the minority on that.
So I actually never watched Acolyte. That's the one that I still had not got to. Would you recommend it?
Yeah. I mean, you should watch it.
Yeah.
I don't know whether or not like you'll love it or not. I know a lot of people didn't, but I thought it was worth exploring more of. I thought the second season would have been incredible, but they didn't even bother.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting because I remember it being a little polarizing when it came out, and I was like, okay, when some of the reviews come in, I'll check it out. But yeah, honestly, that one just kind of slipped a little bit. But I'm curious for you. What would you like to see next, TJ? Like we talked a little bit about like now that Andor's over, it creates like a bit of a vacuum. Like I've never heard anything on if they would do a second season of like Kenobi, for example. I never really heard if they were going to follow up with Ahsoka or anything else. So what do you think would be like next? Because I think, you hear like the movies, right? Like we know the Mandalorian movies coming at some point with, Din Djarin and Grogu and all those things. But I'm curious, like TV show, where they could go, because I've kind of liked where, again, Andor was its own thing. I know it was limited. I really liked Kenobi. Thought that was cool to bring back Ewan McGregor, more, Hayden Christensen, James Earl Jones fight scenes. I'm there for all that, man. I really am.
Yeah. So they are making a second season of Ahsoka. Like that I believe it started in production now.
That's good to hear. Yeah, I hadn't seen anything official, but no, that's good to hear.
They have to explore the time. I think they need to explore like the live action version of like some of those Star Wars Rebels characters and Ahsoka and the different universes. Which again, like you said, keeping the door open, the fact that they can jump to like different universes now, and shown that's possible. Like it opens up a whole worm of possibilities and all like the lore that gets attached to that. So I'd say that's what I'm most looking forward to. I do have one more note on Andor though.
Yeah,
I did appreciate the more you watch it, the more like real life similarities it has. It is like it's science fiction, like Andor and Star Wars is in general, but I mean, like just if you pay attention to the details, you see it, you pick up on a lot of things, a lot of little details that they put in there that people can relate back to their real life things that have happened that don't include lasers and lightsabers and
totally
and aliens and stuff like that. But it's like the general purpose of the show I thought really hit home, and you got to give a shout out to Disney for like literally not pulling out. They didn't stop anything. I mean, that was like it was a brutal show.
Yeah, I mean, no, it was with lots of
what they did in the show.
Right. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. And lots of, there were some tough moments. And I'll tell you, TJ, because I've had a couple TV shows recently. And one of those things that I can completely relate to you, I think nowadays, and you can be honest here. I texted you, and after one episode that I was watching last night, I'm like, TJ, I had to fight back a tear, man. And to be honest, I love those TV shows that can evoke a, emotional reaction out of you. I think we have kind of too much TV that's kind of just meh. And I'm like, if I have a story that might make me hold back a tear or tears of joy or whatever it is, like, I'm down for that. I really am.
Exactly. Be ruthless.
Yeah,
Don't be
no,
afraid.
absolutely. But yeah, no, like I said, it's been awesome, and like I'm very much TJ. Like earlier in the show, I was saying that I had another show before Andor that I was super into for like 8 weeks, and I felt like the void in my life, and I just had a TV void after it was over, and I kind of filled it with Andor, and now I'm like, oh, we're back to like that TV void a little bit again, and it's one of those things that I think is like real. It's like, sometimes when you have a TV show that you really, really like and then it ends, it's kind of sad.
And the thing is, I think we did just kind of watch a one-of-a-kind show, because I don't think we're ever going to get a Star Wars show of that quality or even close, really, ever again. They're not, in terms of investing that much money into something, I don't think they're going to do it unless it's a movie.
Yeah, I would agree with you, because it was greenlit. Again, a little behind the scenes for those who are curious, but again, I'm fascinated by the House of Mouse and Disney and all their things. And when it was greenlit, I believe back before COVID or right around that time, it was a different CEO at Disney, and there were different. They wanted to transition more towards Disney Plus and kind of kept open budgets. Then they kind of have clamped down and kind of trimmed down Star Wars content a little bit and things like that. But I'll say this, TJ, Disney, House of Mouse, man, all them parks, they got plenty of money, man. Can we just keep cutting Star Wars checks? I'm here for it.
Yeah, can we get, let's sell a park for a series?
I'm just saying, the House of Mouse is not struggling for cash. But, yeah, like I said, maybe they'll just, TJ, you and I can maybe, with our extra free time that we have, we'll consult for Disney. That they could use us, right?
Okay. Yeah, I'm down for that.
All right, buddy. Well, again, appreciate you jumping on, talk some Mariners and whatnot with you, boss, and Andor. I sure do miss you, buddy, and we're definitely wishing you all the best. And we're going to have to see each other in person sometime here soon.
Sounds good, buddy. Looking forward to it.
All right, that's TJ Matthewson from the Marine Layer Podcast. We'll take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we're going to talk a little Oregon State baseball, something near and dear to my heart, and we'll talk about the Beavs so far this season. Check in on their national seed hopes. Beavers are taking on Long Beach State tonight. We'll talk briefly about that. Then, top of the hour, we'll be talking some more NBA. Next hour, we'll be catching up with Dylan Callahan Crowley, talking some recruiting. You got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter. Welcoming you back into Rip City Drive. Brendan Slaughter filling in for Chad Doing here on this Friday, just about 5 o'clock. Hope everyone's having a great Friday so far. Just got done talking with TJ Mathewson from the Marine Layer podcast, talking some Mariners and most importantly, talking some Andor. I mean, if you guys have heard this show by now, and we'll have a little bit more coming up later, you know I love my TV. And when I'm not watching sports and consuming sports for this job, I am consuming as much TV as possible. So it is it is one of those things where for entertainment, I absolutely love it. I love to be able to be knowledgeable on many different TV shows and try to consume quite a bit because I say to everyone, we are in the golden age of streaming. It has never been easier to be able to find what you want to find online to watch. But for this specific segment, we're going to zero in for the next few minutes on Oregon State baseball as the Beavers are in their final series of the regular season. Will be off next week, not having a conference tournament, being in the independent that they are this year. Beavers are currently 39, 12, and 1. Yes, unfortunately, even in baseball, there are still those silly ties. I don't know what, it's one of those things just comical because, ties, it's just not a thing in sports. But nevertheless, they have a tie on their record. Have Long Beach State this weekend, have one game tonight, one game tomorrow. Already got the win last night. And the thing I kind of wanted to settle in here in this segment and touch base on real quick is Oregon State's national seed hopes. So for those of you who are not familiar with the college baseball postseason bracket, the way to make or to give yourself the best chance to make Omaha, make a run at the College World Series, is to be one of the top 8 national seeds. If you are one of the top 8 national seeds, you guarantee home field advantage all the way to Omaha. So if you are one of those top 8 teams, you will host a regional. If you're one of those top 8 teams, you will then host a super regional should you win your regional. And in the case of Oregon State, it is their best path towards making going back to Omaha, their first trip back since they won in 2018. Got close a couple years ago with the Super Regional having at Goss Stadium and lost to Auburn. But here we are with Oregon State having 2 more games left. And again, they're going to, approach the 40 win mark and most likely should get that either tonight or tomorrow. And, end the season, end the regular season without, again, the benefit of the conference tournament. Most likely, again, considering Long Beach State's not the toughest of opponents, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say they're probably 41, 12, and 1 going into the postseason. Is that enough to be a national seed? Well, for those of you who are curious, there is, Oregon State's a bit of an enigma for the most part as far as being a dominant college baseball program, really in, in the northern climates. And with that, you kind of look and it's pretty consistent across the board. There aren't a whole lot of great teams, usually from northern climates where the weather's not as great. And there's usually an eons of teams from the SEC and ACC that are, locking down those spots. And, in the case of Oregon State this year, trying to get back to Omaha, I think, their attempt to get to a national seed, I think it will fall up a little bit short if you're asking me objectively. I think they will end up as probably the 9, 10, or 11 national seed. I go back to the schedule and, anything's possible. Things could always change. But I think losing the 4 games that they did to Oregon was perhaps the difference in the national seed race. You gotta tip your cap to the Oregon Ducks in that series. Oregon State usually isn't too concerned with what Oregon's got going on baseball wise, and credit to them. Oregon came through and played 4 really good games and got 4 really key wins, and they've used that as a springboard to try to chase down their own national seed and their own regional host down in Eugene this year too. So, I think ultimately Oregon State's probably going to land as a 9, 10, or 11, considering their baseball ends after this weekend before the selection show on Memorial Day. But nevertheless, Oregon State back in action tonight against Long Beach State, 5:35 p.m. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be getting you ready for NBA action tonight. The Knicks and the Celtics are going to be getting underway here in just a little bit. We'll also be catching up with Dylan Callahan-Crowley from Rivals and BeaversEdge.com, talking some more Oregon State recruiting stuff, whatever else we get into. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter. What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here. Denver Nuggets force a deciding Game 7 with the OKC Thunder with a 119-107 win in Denver in Game 6. The series will now shift back to Oklahoma City for the seventh and deciding game. Boston Celtics are facing elimination tonight at the Garden as the Knicks will look to close out the series in 6, while the Celtics will look to win 2 in a row to force a Game 7. Obviously, no Jason Tatum for the Celtics, but are you betting against the Celtics if they win in the Garden tonight? Push it back to Boston? Brock Purdy and San Francisco agree on a 5-year, $265 million pact. He will be paid more in 1 week than his previous entire contract. One heck of a story for the last pick in the 2022 NFL Draft. We caught up with Sean Highkin from the Rose Garden Report and TJ Mathewson from the Marine Layer podcast in hours 1 and 2. Hour 3, we got Dylan Callahan-Crowley from Rivals and BeaversEdge.com talking some Oregon State recruiting and more. You've got Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back into Rip City Drive. Brendan Slaughter with you. Hope you all are having a good Friday afternoon so far, just past the 5 o'clock hour. For those of you who are listening in the car, those of you who listen to us on the iHeartRadio app, we appreciate you. And again, just recapping, great conversation with Sean Highkin in hour number 1. We talked Blazers, we talked the lottery, we talked the impending sale. Then TJ Mathewson, hour 2, talked some Mariners. Mariners fighting off a few injuries right now, but none long term, which is good to hear for their starting pitching staff. And TJ kind of believes that this maybe could be a year where they could start to put some things together. No, you probably heard that before. Stop me. But nevertheless, TJ confident what we're seeing from the Mariners. And then great conversation on Andor from TJ as well. Absolutely love being able to chat Star Wars, talk TV, anything like that. That is 100% up my alley. So appreciate that time from TJ as well. And if you haven't seen Andor, definitely worth checking out. We'll be catching up with Dylan Callahan-Crowley here in just a few minutes, just 20 minutes after the hour, talking some Oregon State recruiting. There's been a few things for the Beavers recently, some OVs, official visits in May. Going to get his thoughts on just who's significant early on, who maybe to keep an eye on. Oregon State also had a decommitment recently as well, so I'm curious to get his thoughts on that as well, a local product in LaMarcus Bell, so I want to get his thoughts there. So lots to get into later in the show. Then we'll also be talking a little more TV later in the show as well. Got a little rant on Yellowstone and its subsequent spinoffs that I want to make sure to mention. There's some really good and exciting news if you were a fan of anything coming out of Taylor Sheridan's Notebook. So that's exciting too. But let's get you reset for what's going on tonight. Again, the Boston Celtics and the New York Knicks just about ready to get underway from Madison Square Garden. The Knicks are a 3.5-point favorite in this game. But, I don't know. It's one of those things where I think after last game, seeing how well the Celtics, played without Jason Tatum, and then you see, their records going in, they're 10-2 on the year without Jason Tatum. Their numbers are pretty similar. I'm not saying that that's a guarantee, but that Celtics can get this done. But it's almost like the uniforms are magic in a kind of a way, and it's like you talk about those Celtic uniforms and the history and the lore that they have, and considering how deep they are. Right, it's not just Tatum. If it was just Jason Tatum and then respectfully a bunch of role players, you'd be like, okay, their odds are probably not great. But you have another Supermax star in Jaylen Brown. Excuse me. You've got another guy in Derek White who is a very good player. You got Jrue Holiday. You've got Kristaps Porzingis. And then you got role players like Sam Hauser. Maybe the best role player there is, and Peyton Pritchard right now. So I do really like that team. The Knicks are obviously great too, and you're seeing how they've gotten so close to being able to get back to the Eastern Conference Finals. And, they are, I heard this week, a lot of people are like, this is the best chance the Knicks have had to win a title in probably 30 years. And you're like, yeah, those Carmelo teams were probably never real big, Amari teams, real big, like deep postseason contenders. They were good, made the playoff, but I don't know how deep into the postseason they were thought of. And, Then you got to go back to those early, Patrick Ewing, John Starks days, man. So that's kind of exciting. And I think either way, like, I think a lot of people would probably like to see the Knicks win, especially with, how the Celtics are the winningest franchise and, so on and so forth. But I've kind of enjoyed rooting for the Celtics, this season as it's kind of gone all in a real casual sense. I mentioned, despite my Oregon State fandom, I really, really like what Peyton Pritchard's brought to the table. I really enjoy rooting for him. And I like what I've seen from the Celtics. Jason Tatum's fun to root for, and I'll admit, after watching Celtic City on HBO, I'm a little more knowledgeable with the Celtics, franchise, and just have a little bit more respect and kind of like, oh, okay, like it's Boston, and if you were to ask me if now, like between like it's like the two big franchises, Boston and LA, it's like obviously being here on the West Coast, I'd take Boston. I'm like no love for LA here. So it's kind of interesting. So I'm curious to see how all that shakes out. And I think it's gonna be a dandy of a game. But as I said earlier, if Boston or if excuse me, if the Knicks cannot win tonight, I don't see them doing it. I'm not saying it can't happen, but if it goes back to TD Garden, we're back in Boston for game 7, that crowd, I would be surprised if you saw Jason Tatum on the sidelines. But you never know, I guess, right? And just imagine, like, I'm purely speaking hypothetically here, may totally be in rehab. I know he already had surgery and everything, but just what that would do for that building if you have a game 7, then you see like, Tatum like emerge and like, rally up the crowd. So that would kind of be something I would like to see a game 7, but I think if it goes to game 7, it's going to be Boston. So I think if those Knicks fans that are listening and those Knicks fans that want to see the Knicks win, I think they got to get it done tonight. So that'll be interesting to see. And then, like I said, on the other side, we're sitting here talking about these two games, the Thunder and the Nuggets and the Celtics and Knicks, when, oh, ho hum, casually, just the 6-seed Minnesota Timberwolves and the 4-seed Indiana Pacers are just chilling. Just like, hey, anyone going to come play us here in the NBA or in the conference finals? I mean, I mentioned earlier, Jason Tatum, how much injuries suck. I mean, it's even more so with Steph Curry, right? I'm not saying that the Warriors would have won that series with Steph Curry, but it's kind of hard to not look at the results and be like, well, if he was healthy, does that series not go to 6? Does that series not go to 7? And, that's just disappointing because I think, Steph Curry's got a limited window to continue to add to, the rings that he has. And, same with, Draymond, that core, so to speak. And, Steph getting injured kind of, took him out because they were first round. They took out the 2-seed Rockets, right? And then you run up against the Timberwolves team, and we found out, like, as it turns out, Jimmy Butler and a bunch of role players, and Jimmy Butler, Draymond, and a bunch of role players, just wasn't kind of enough to get it done and get it over the hump. That's just how good Steph Curry is. And then on the other side of the coin, my goodness, can we give Slick Rick Carlisle some credit? I mean, the 4-seed Indiana Pacers not only dismantle the Milwaukee Bucks 119 or 4-1 in that series, then went and took down the number 1 seed Cleveland Cavaliers 4-1 as well. And the Cavaliers, mind you, won 64 games during the regular season. So it would almost be like if the Nuggets had beaten the Thunder or the Grizzlies had beaten the Thunder. So I think it's absolutely fascinating what they've been able to do. I think it's very safe to say that, I remember going into this series, all you heard going into the series with Cleveland, Tyrese Halliburton's overrated. He's overrated. It's all Tyrese Halliburton overrated. Well, I tell you what, Tyrese Halliburton is a guy, and a dude. He is him, as they would say. And I continue to look back, and it's like, I know Domantas Sabonis is a solid player. But what in the world were the Kings thinking? Especially considering that they ended up trading De'Aaron Fox anyway. I mean, that was, it's fascinating because, Indiana was kind of toiling there for a little while when they had, just Domantas Sabonis and Miles Turner in the front court, not really another star. And then they trade Sabonis and, keep Miles Turner and kind of rebuild that team around, Benedict Mathurin, their recent pick, and so on and so forth. You acquire Pascal Siakam. And just very quietly, Tyrese Halliburton turned into be, a franchise player. And I think that's turned out to be just great for the Indiana Pacers. It's great to see Rick Carlisle doing things, obviously respected the heck out of him from his time in Dallas. So lots of like there from the NBA side of it. And I think it's going to be fascinating, right? If you're putting my feet to the fire, I think the Thunder will take down the Nuggets in Game 7. I know the Thunder are still a little young on the postseason experience and all that. And Game 7, I think Nikola Jokic has the slight advantage, even being on the road, because he is, like I said, I think he's the best player in the world. But the Thunder are deep. They're deep, and I do think that ultimately that might be what pushes them over the top, but that's going to be a fantastic Game 7. And then, like I said, I would give 60-40 odds that the Knicks win tonight, but then if they don't win tonight and we go back to Boston for a Game 7, I probably would put closer to 70-30 Boston odds, maybe 60-40 Boston odds. So that series has a possibility to swing massively if New York doesn't get the win tonight. So something I'll be keeping a very close eye on as well. But that pretty much sets the stage, right? I mean, it's been a very entertaining NBA playoffs, and that's one thing that Chad said on the radio several times that I kind of echo is this has been a fun NBA playoffs, right? I mean, you even go back to like some of the opening series. The only two series that really didn't have any pizzazz were the Thunder annihilating the Grizzlies. Okay, fair enough. And Cleveland taking out the Heat in 4 games. Right? I mean, including, I believe it was something like a 50-point win in the final clinching game. Outside of that, I mean, you're talking 4-5 Denver on one side. Denver takes that series 4-3. Now they're in a 3-3 series with the Thunder. Obviously Minnesota took the series against LeBron and the Lakers, thankfully. Got them out of the playoffs nice and early. It's been nice not to hear about the Lakers this playoffs, folks. Wouldn't you agree? And, then they play the Warriors, take down them 4-1. And then how about the Warriors before Steph Curry gets hurt? Houston was a 2 seed. They played great basketball all year, and Golden State was able to win that series in 7. And then go to the East. We mentioned that the Pacers kind of handled the Bucks in 4 games, but even the Pistons had a moment against the Knicks last round. The Magic got a game and played more competitively against the Celtics than I thought they would. So I'm really liking this NBA playoffs this year. And there were a couple years where it really wasn't quite all that intriguing to me. As much as it had been in previous years. And man, I'm all in this year. I'm excited to see where it comes out. And maybe it's the lower seeds. I know they're not separated by a ton of win-loss this year, especially in the West. But just kind of like, if the Nuggets win, let's just say it could be a 4-6 for the West as far as the seeding of the teams. And if the Knicks win, it's 3-4 in the East with the top 2 teams out. So I like the parity. I like seeing some things change. And, we've like same with the Timberwolves and Pacers. Like they are truly some new teams I'd really like to see. One of those 2 teams make the finals. I don't know how likely that is because I think the Pacers are going to be playing a team in the Celtics and Knicks that is, really, really good. And same with the Timberwolves on the other side. But if either one of them could make it to the NBA finals, I think that'd be really cool. Just similar a couple years ago when we saw the Miami Heat make the finals as an 8 seed, despite, obviously, not being able to put up a huge fight against the Denver Nuggets in that series when Joker got his first ring. But nevertheless, it was cool to see. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be talking with Dylan Callahan-Crowley from RivalsandBeaversEdge.com. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive. Brendan Slaughter here, filling in for Chad doing this afternoon. Hope you all are having a great afternoon so far. We've had a couple good hours, caught up with Sean Hyken from the Rose Garden Report, caught up with TJ Mathewson from the Marine Layer podcast, and now excited to bring on my coworker, Dylan Callahan Crowley. Dylan, what's going on, my man? How are you?
I'm great, Brendan. Thanks for having me on this afternoon. It's great to be on.
Yeah, man. I'm glad we worked it out. You know, obviously, you and I being a couple time zones away, had to dial in the time and everything. And I know you're also full time dad and everything. So I appreciate you making some time to talk some recruiting, talk some Beavs, and everything else. But Dylan, we got to start here because I'm just curious to get your thoughts because I know you obviously being in Pennsylvania, big Philly fan. How close did you think you guys were to Cooper Flag?
That's a good question. I definitely thought that, when it looked like it was about to go our way there for a second, I was thinking, oh my gosh, are they going to luck out here and get another chance to get this right? And then, of course, somehow the Mavs of all teams find a way to get that number one pick. It was a little bit of a dagger to the heart, you can say, especially after a similar lottery occurred with the NHL, and the Flyers almost got a shot at the number one pick and ended up actually falling in that draft. So between those two, I've had enough of the lottery drafts for a while.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, Dylan, I mean, I'm sure you can you can definitely relate to my pain then because, Dallas had, a roughly Portland Trailblazers-ish chance of moving up to get Cooper Flag too. So, how come it couldn't have been, the Trailblazers too? If it's, say whatever. But, I had to get your thoughts on that because, that was obviously huge. And, as I told you, I was in Vegas this week and I was far from the only person who was poolside Monday afternoon being like, oh, the lottery. And if I had $1 for every kind of ooh and that I got from, the sports side, TV poolside tables when it's like, oh, the Mavericks. So, go figure, right? NBA's fun, NBA's funny, lotteries are gonna lottery and all that. But yeah, no, I had to get your thoughts being the deep Philly fan, what you thought of the Sixers jumping into the top three. So you guys in the market for like an Ace Bailey now?
I wouldn't mind an Ace Bailey. It's one of those things where I think the top two draft picks are pretty solidified, but
right.
after that I think it's one of those things where the difference between number 3 and number 7, number 8 isn't going to be all that huge. So I wouldn't mind Daryl Morey here, taking some calls to see what they could potentially get for that number 3 pick. They have to get creative with how things have unfolded in Philadelphia. Obviously, love when Embiid is healthy, but that's a big question. And so I think it's time to really focus around building around Tyrese Maxey, and then whenever you can get Embiid healthy, you take advantage of it. But that's a big if.
Right. No, and absolutely. Like I said, there was so much that happened with the lottery. I'm like, I know we didn't come on to talk lottery, but I had to definitely get your thoughts on that first. Again, Dylan
sure.
Callahan Crowley joining me here on the Rip City Drive. He covers recruiting for many different rival sites. Again, as his Twitter bio says, he likely covers recruiting for your favorite team. But in this specific instance, we're going to be talking about Dylan over at BeaversEdge.com. Dylan, this has been it's typical for a football May, right? So spring football is over. You're getting into OV season. Just you've done a couple stories the first couple weekends on who the Beavers have had in tow. I'm just kind of curious, just for Beaver fans that are listening, just what's kind of the vibe of those kind of early on those visits? What are you hearing from guys, and are they going well so far?
Yeah, I think the early returns have been positive for Oregon State. I know this past week in the May 9th official visit weekend when they had a trio of prospects on campus, wide receiver Asen Dors out of Duncanville, Texas, Jamarius Connors out of Sumner High School down in Florida, and then offensive lineman out of Michigan, Tristan Comer. They had those three on campus last weekend, and all three visits went really well. Doesn't obviously mean that all three are going to eventually be Beavers, but I think Oregon State did a great job of strengthening their chances for each of those prospects. The week before that, they had one of their commits on campus in Sinead Thomas, a really talented wide receiver out of San Francisco area. They had a pair of brothers from Arizona, Bo Jandro and Nico Jandro, on campus as well. But those two are always going to be a little bit of long shots. They both had great visits to Corvallis, but Nico is already committed to Oklahoma. Bo is probably not going to be too far behind him. So, they are recruiting. They're recruiting guys who are legitimate Power 4 talents as well. At least some of these prospects are. So they're not recruiting just against the Boise States, the Washington States of the world, though. We are seeing a lot of recruitments come down to those three. They are still going at it with some really high-end programs, hoping to, maybe pick up a surprise commitment or two per cycle. It's going to be tough, but they're doing a pretty good job of it so far. And they have their biggest official visit weekend yet this weekend down there in Corvallis. So that should be a pretty interesting weekend for Trent Bray and his program.
Absolutely. Catching up with Dylan Callahan-Crowley, a Rivals recruiting analyst, also the recruiting analyst at beaversedge.com. I'm curious too, Dylan, kind of along that, you cover recruiting for a variety of sites, some bigger sites or some bigger schools and some smaller schools. So you kind of see the full range of recruiting. I'm just curious if, compared to where we are now, considering where Oregon State was, like we all know, Oregon State got left behind. They had to rebuild their conference, and that was kind of the narrative was Oregon State's going to struggle to get recruits with, all this, and recruiting would take a dip. And then I see, relatively like we've done our decade of classes, Trenton Bray, it still seems like Oregon State's holding into their niche. And I can't imagine they're, doing all too bad when you can go and have the ability to go get a quarterback like Malik Murphy. So I would say that, like, all considering, even though recruiting is not going to be Oregon State's, top 10, top 20, that's not their MO. It seems to me like even without the conference, they're still kind of recruiting their guys. You kind of seeing the same thing?
Yeah, no, they're definitely holding their own. Obviously, the type of recruit that they are going after has shifted a little bit more towards your more high-end group of 5 prospect, more so than having a heavy dose of Power 4 or at the time Power 5 prospects. But that's just, that comes with losing the conference, kind of losing that the benefits that go along with it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, Washington State and Boise State both recruit high-end talent as well. That's why both programs have been successful. That's why Oregon State has been successful. So in a way, they have changed a tiny bit, but they're still being aggressive on the recruiting trail. They're still recruiting throughout the country. They're being creative in how they do it. I mean, that Michigan prospect I just talked about, Tristan Comer out of Freeland, Michigan. From when I did the research during that offer, I believe that was the first time that Oregon State had offered a Michigan prospect in the last 5-6 years. It's been a while since they've done so. That's not a state they usually target. They have never actually landed a commitment out of Michigan in the Rivals era, which dates back to the late 90s, I believe. So, I mean, they are expanding their footprint, which I think you need to do in the modern age of college football, because you're going to have to get creative in how you recruit and who you're recruiting. A long time, not even a long time ago, just a couple of years ago, recruiting, I think, was still very much a regional-based thing in college football, and it still is for some programs. But for a program like Oregon State, who is in this unique situation of the what is left of the Pac-12 and how it's being rebuilt, obviously, they have had to be creative in how they are going after recruits. They're still recruiting the state of Texas very hard, which, in my opinion, never a bad place to recruit. Even the mid to low 3-stars in Texas, multiple guys of that stature turn out to be studs in the collegiate level and go on to have NFL careers.
Sure.
So they're recruiting Texas, they're recruiting Florida, and then they're expanding into places like a Michigan, and Kansas. They recently offered a Kansas prospect who is on campus this weekend. So they're being very creative. I mean, I'm looking at the states that have prospects visiting this recruiting cycle, and yeah, there's a Kansas, there's Michigan, Oklahoma, Florida, and then you got your normal states for Oregon State, California, Texas, Washington, Arizona, Nevada,
Right.
Oregon, but they are being creative in how they do it. They're, like I said, expand their footprint and try not leaving any stones unturned. And I think that's also a part of the coaching staff that Trent Bray has assembled. That this coaching staff has had experience not just in the Pacific Northwest, which obviously is important because that's to a degree going to be where the Beavers want to make their bread and butter to that in Northern California. But they have members of this coaching staff have coached all across the country, have coached at the NFL level, the collegiate level. This is a coaching staff with a ton of experience in different places, and that's, I think, benefiting them on the recruiting trail as well.
Absolutely. We're catching up with Dylan Callahan-Crowley from BeaversEdge.com and Rivals. And I think back to that story you did, Dylan, about probably a month or so ago now, where you talked about their increased interest in Mississippi, right? I remember when you wrote that, I'm like, Oregon State, man, like no disrespect, just like the way that I knew it to be. Like Oregon State doesn't recruit Mississippi, so like seeing that and that expansion is really cool. But last thing I want to hit up on you with Dylan before we move on to our next segment, I'm curious, just a couple things. One, what are your thoughts on the recruiting class right now? You've got, as you mentioned, Sinai Thomas, Noah Tischendorf, and Deegan Rose in there. Beavers did lose a commitment from LaMarcus Bell, Lake Oswego running back. Again, I can see the Lake Oswego city limits from outside my window here. So I'm just curious, like there were some Beaver fans that had some thoughts on that, Dylan. We kind of discussed it a little bit at BeaversEdge.com. If you want to check out more thoughts on that, you can do that there. Did that kind of surprise you at all? And is that something Beaver fans should be a little concerned about or not so much?
I wouldn't necessarily be concerned. It did surprise me. I think it was unfortunate for both parties of how everything unfolded. Obviously, LaMarcus did commit early in the process just this past January, which, there are plenty of recruits out there who do commit early in the process. And some of those commitments stick, but the large majority of those don't. Kids, take visits to a school, get enamored by it, maybe develop a great relationship with a coach and decide, this is where I want to be. But as time goes on, they decide that, hey, maybe I need to, look around, make sure that this is where I want to be.
Right.
And that is where LaMarcus was when he decided to decommit from Oregon State. And then, according to him, it was Oregon State who decided to cancel the official visit. I get it from Oregon State's point of view. It is unfortunate for LaMarcus since he was saying that he was still going to consider Oregon State, but at the same time, I think the Beavers are well aware that when a recruit decommits from a program, it's very rare that recruit will ultimately end back up at that program. It's just for a variety of reasons, one of those things that usually doesn't work out. There are a couple of cases where it has, like a non-Oregon State case, but one that is off the top of my head is current Dallas Cowboys linebacker Micah Parsons was once committed to Penn State, decommitted, wound back up at Penn State. But that's, I've been covering recruiting for a while now, and that's only one of maybe a handful of cases I can remember over the last decade of schools that I've covered. So I wouldn't be worried about that. I'm an Oregon State fan, but the commits in this class, as I know I do ramble on a little bit, the commits in this class, I love the potential of Deegan Rose, the quarterback. I think he could be a really productive quarterback at the collegiate level for Oregon State. Has been very productive at the high school level, shows a good arm talent, accurate. Sinai Thomas, I love the potential he has a wide receiver. I think he could be a good weapon for Rose down the road. And then Noah Tischendorf, the Lake Ridge standout, that was a big commitment for the Beavers. Just to get the ball rolling within the state. They have offered a couple prospects in the state. Obviously, a couple of those guys are headed to Oregon or Washington at the top of the board, but a couple still remain, including Baker City native Rayson Jones, one of the top track stars in the country as well. He put up some monster numbers as a junior in limited action last year, and he's a top target for the Beavers heading into next month. He has official visits to Boise State and Oregon State, so that's going to be a big one to watch, Oregon State fans. And it'll be interesting because, also, like I said, one of the best track stars in the country, and he has been non-committal if he wants to do track at the collegiate level. If he does want to do track, that's obviously not going to be something that plays into favor of Oregon State. So that will be, I think, the big factor to watch in his recruitment, because he has the potential to develop into a NCAA championship level track star on top of what he can do on the football field.
No, for sure. Definitely some things to keep in consideration there. And again, Dylan Callahan-Crowley, my man at BeaversEdge.com. You want to read more on his thoughts on the Beavers, make sure to head over to BeaversEdge.com, catch all his latest stuff, in addition to Dylan in the Rivals Network. Dylan, my man, I appreciate you big time, man. It was great catching up, and looking forward to when we can do it again, my man.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Have a great night, and thanks for having me again.
Yeah, appreciate it, Dylan. Thank you so much to Dylan Callahan-Crowley for joining us on this edition of the Rip City Drive. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, our final segment of the afternoon. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive. Big thanks to Dylan Callahan Crowley for joining us that last segment, talking some Oregon State recruiting. I know I'm getting excited just thinking about the start of football season as we draw closer. Again, big shout out to Dylan for joining us on this segment. Also, shout out to Sean Hyken and TJ Mathewson for also joining us on the program today. Caught up with Sean, talked some Blazers stuff, and a lot to talk about. Obviously, the Trailblazers right now are, there's just so much news, so much to talk about. It's not just the draft lottery. It's obviously the impending ownership changes and, what's going to go on there. So lots to continue to discuss with Sean. I'm looking forward to seeing how our conversation evolves. Keep going on. Maybe we'll catch up with him next week as well. And then, of course, my guy TJ Mathewson from the Marine Layer podcast. Really appreciated TJ coming on, talking some Mariners and really just getting a feel for, is this team legit, right? I think that's something a lot of Mariner fans kind of ask themselves when they get off to a hot start. And, obviously leading the AL West, the Mariners are doing fantastic so far this year, but they've dealt with some injuries, that pitching staff early on. So, it's going to be interesting to see how their pace maintains over the course of summer. And again, folks, for any Mariner stuff, I highly encourage you to check out that Marine Layer podcast. My guy, TJ Mathewson, nobody works harder at covering the Mariners than him, without a doubt. Final segment of the day here on Rip City Drive on a Friday. I hope everyone's having an awesome Friday so far. Hopefully not stuck in too much traffic as you're making your way home, or heck, maybe even took Friday off. Hey, that might be the way to do it. But for those who are sticking with us, final segment, we're going to shake it up a little bit today. We're going to talk some TV, and most importantly, going to talk a little bit just entertainment and some general things that have kind of been on my mind as of late. And as you guys all know, I am a big-time Yellowstone fan, and it's a series and subsequent spinoff series that I'm super into. I think it's some of the best stuff on TV right now, and just kind of want to dive into that a little bit with some of the new news that's come up here in the last couple days. And for those who are big fans, you'll definitely be intrigued to hear what's coming up. Again, just going to use this to talk about Yellowstone and, more than anything, not just Yellowstone, but Taylor Sheridan in general. And, for those of you who don't know, Taylor Sheridan is the showrunner / creator of Yellowstone, and now so many more spin-off series, so many other series for Paramount Plus. And, you can make the argument he's arguably one of the hottest showrunners in TV right now. And this little segment's going to be dedicated towards talking about just how impressive I think these TV shows have been. So for those who have heard me on the mic these past 5 years, you'll know I'm as big of a Yellowstone fan and its subsequent spinoffs as anybody. I can attest that with the garb that I have in my house. I've got Yellowstone Monopoly. I've got Yellowstone Uno. I've got a couple Yellowstone shirts. Just, all that kind of thing. Like it is one of those things that has really grasped me and, taken over these last, 7 years since it originally debuted back in 2018. And, as I mentioned, I think it's all owed to Taylor Sheridan. We're going to talk about some awesome numbers that I read in a story here recently coming over from Bloomberg, just talking about what the series has eventually worked its way into. But again, what began as an idea years ago for Taylor Sheridan, now per Bloomberg has blossomed into a $3 billion franchise. And again, we're talking Yellowstone. We're talking the spin-off shows that are directly related to the Dutton family with 1923, 1883. And then you've got the, not in the Yellowstone universe, but I call it the Taylor Sheridan universe. And for those of you who maybe weren't into so much the cowboy Western scene, I would then raise you and say, see Taylor Sheridan's other shows, because I truly believe there's something at Paramount under this man's umbrella for everybody, right? I mean, you're talking Tulsa King, starring Sylvester Stallone. Absolutely amazing show. Love what we've seen from Sly and Tulsa King so far. You've also got Landman, starring Billy Bob Thornton. That one just finished up its first season. Got a lot of publicity for it as well. Also had John Hamm, Demi Moore. Great show as well. Lioness, which stars Nicole Kidman and Zoe Saldana. Kind of a bit of an under-the-radar show, in my opinion, but very, very underrated. Very good show. Bit of a spy thriller. Then, last but not least, Mayor of Kingstown, featuring Jeremy Renner. For those who don't know, Jeremy Renner's return to acting is one of the greatest stories out there after his injury. And, he's picked up Mayor of Kingstown right where he left off before and after. So, considering that all this started back in 2018, and I love to tell this story, for those who don't remember, Yellowstone was something that almost didn't work. This was something that Taylor Sheridan had brought to, different companies and, different people kind of flirted with the idea for a minute. And it just, before he was able to establish this, the general thought was there's not really a market for westerns anymore. And that's where, I kind of have a wry smile because he had a vision, he had a plan, and I think more than anything, he was able to, not compromise. And we all talk about that, right? If you believe in something, you're a content creator, you don't want to compromise in your vision, compromise in what you believe. And that's something that I think is maybe one of his best traits is he has a vision for what he wants all these shows to be, and he has the support to be able to make them as he sees fit. And, I think, more than anything, beyond those shows, this started in 2018 when it was pitched originally. It was before we had Paramount Network. It was originally Spike TV. I'm sure most of you listening can still remember Spike TV and just the kind of, I would say, it wasn't maybe more than just kind of a cable channel, right? I think Paramount's definitely helped with brand exposure, but originally that's what I remember seeing is, oh my goodness, this Western show starring Kevin Costner and, some other actors that I kind of knew but weren't super familiar with coming to, then Spike TV before they rebranded to Paramount. And I was like, okay, this intrigues me, right? KC, Kevin Costner had been out of, the major TV game for a couple years, was coming off, some other, projects like Draft Day and whatnot. I was like, okay, this could be an interesting kind of moment for him to kind of get back into the Westerns. And man, he embraced it. Everybody embraced it. And it just took off like wildfire. And you talk about the first couple seasons where, it kind of, was getting its footing, right? Was finding an audience, so to speak. And then you talk about the subsequent seasons, how they were able to, move it to a more proper time slot rather than summers, middle of the week to, I believe it was fall and winter at, on Sunday nights, opened up their broadcast reach so much. And then you started to see what we saw now, which was, the development of spinoffs, right? 1883 was first, 1923. Then we're seeing, that's just in the Yellowstone universe. And we have some more news on that as well. We'll share as well. But, it just all started to blossom and grow from there. And I think, when you think about like taking a leap, like it was obviously a very big leap for, Paramount at the time to invest a lot of money. And that's one of the things that I think is very fascinating is it's no secret these period pieces, specifically, 1923, 1883, even Yellowstone to an extent, less so. Period pieces are expensive to make, folks. And for those of you who had seen 1923 or 1883, you would see just the attention to detail, whether it be the Model Ts or the covered wagons and just the costume design. It's out of this world. And then you realize those have some pretty big price tags, right? Something in the range of $10 to $20 million an episode. And when you're producing, 8 episodes a season, that can be an expensive, investment for a, production company, and particularly, in this case, Paramount. But that's what I think is that makes this relationship between them is so special between Paramount and Taylor Sheridan. That is that they have a good thing going on. There's obviously some change on the horizon as Paramount's expected to be bought, and how mergers go at the corporate level and all those things. So I'm curious to see ultimately, but what happens. But all that to say is, they're for those who are super interested in those shows, they're coming back soon. So as of the Q1, Paramount released just recently kind of their news and what's coming up next. They announced that Tulsa King and Landman are going to be up next. Season 3 of Tulsa King is going to be coming up. Season 2 of Landman, along with the Mayor of Kingstown Season 4. And this was the one I was perhaps most excited for, folks. The newly titled spinoff Dutton Ranch, which is going to be featuring Cole Hauser and Kelly Riley, a.k.a. Beth and Rip, continuing on where their show goes from here. There's also going to be a Casey spinoff in the works. Not sure on that release date, but that's to be come too. So I think, just taking a step back and realizing that it's all gas, no brakes here, folks. For those who maybe were like me, felt a little emptiness after 1923 ended and were like, man, like what's next in the Taylor Sheridan universe? Because these shows are so deep, so powerful. You just kind of leaves a void when you've been looking forward to them weekly, for 8 weeks or whatever it is. And I think that's just exciting to know that it's continuing to flow. And I think the ultimate plan is to have, content from them over at Paramount rolling pretty often. And, this was something that I thought was particularly interesting. Tulsa King, Landman, and Lioness all finished in the top 10 for streaming originals in the fourth quarter of 2024 per Nielsen. Again, you had Lincoln Lawyer, Outer Banks, Love is Blind, British Baking Show, Squid Game, Virgin River, all these things. A lot of Netflix shows kind of dominate that. But you see a couple Paramount Pluses coming in there, and I think that's kind of telling too. Then, first quarter 2025, you've got Landman, and 1923 coming in the top 10 with, again, a lot of Netflix, Amazon, Apple TV representation as well. But to really hammer home this point in this Bloomberg article that I keep referencing here that, talks about just how big Yellowstone has become, Taylor Sheridan, since 2022, his original streaming shows have now generated more viewing than any other showrunner. His 1.3 billion view hours top Shonda Rhimes, 1.2 billion, top Bill Lawrence, 700 million, and top Ryan Murphy, 700 million. So, again, it's, a specific statistic and all those things. But again, if you are listening to this, you haven't jumped into what I like to call the Taylor Sheridan universe, I would highly recommend it. Whether, you're into, the Yellowstone, the ranching, the cowboying, you're into the spy thriller of Lioness, you're into the oil boom of Landman, you're into kind of the mob life of Tulsa King. I mean, there truly is something here for everybody, folks. And, one of the first things I wanted to do when I found out I was filling in for Chad doing on this show was be able to give Taylor Sheridan his due credit, because I think what they have put on TV recently has been, as good as anything out there. And it's one of those things that I will stand on this hill, make a mountain out of a molehill, and say that it's going to be really hard to change my mind. I think this is some of the best stuff on TV. There's a little bit something for everybody, and safe to say I'm extremely excited for what's next. So that's going to go ahead and do it for us here on the Rip City Drive here on a Friday.
Before we go, I need to know.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you going to watch the new episode of RuPaul's Drag Race this weekend?
I have not, nor do I watch that show, Shacker.
Well,
but
in
hey,
case
I see how big it is, of course.
Yeah, in case you probably didn't know that former Oregon State women's basketball player Talia von Oelhoffen was on the most current episode, and she gets a makeover to look like a drag queen.
Really? Talia? No, I did not know that. But again, Talia being in USC, being in LA, would assume that show's probably filmed in LA. Interesting. So yeah, go figure. But yeah, I actually, now that you say it, Shacker, there's I saw quite a few advertisements for the live shows in Vegas when I was walking around the last couple days too. So interesting you mentioned that. But no, yeah, I think like I said, long story short, definitely check out Taylor Sheridan shows, Paramount Plus, if you haven't. If you have, you already know. If you haven't, I'd say check it out. Like I said, there's something for everybody depending on kind of what your style is, what you're interested in, what you're looking for in a TV show, whether it's, the Western, the thriller, the crime, all of it. So again, highly would recommend. And like I said, that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for this Friday edition of the Rip City Drive. But don't fret, folks. I will be back next week filling in for Chad as well. So get used to Brendan Slaughter behind the mic, because we'll be talking all next week. And I want to hear from you guys next week as well. 503-248-0620. We'll be talking Blazers, NBA playoffs. We're getting into the good time, folks, and who knows, whatever else we're going to get into. Big thanks to, again, to Michael Shacker for producing the program today, and a big shout out to Dylan Cal.